Benjamin Ben Lawson enjoyed his quiet, secluded life on the outskirts of Maplewood, a sleepy suburban town known for its manicured lawns and overbearing neighborhood associations. His home, an expansive colonial estate, sat behind a long, winding driveway. It was his sanctuary, his fortress of solitude. The house itself was modest in style, but grand in scale, surrounded by towering sycamore trees and meticulously cared-for gardens that burst with color every spring. The symphony of birdsong each morning was a far cry from the chaos he dealt with in his professional life. Ben was a man who valued his privacy. Most people in Maplewood knew little about him, and that was just the way he liked it. Rumors swirled now and then. Some said he was retired military, others whispered about clandestine government work, but no one knew for sure. What they did know was that Ben Lawson wasn't one to be trifled with. For years, the Maplewood Homeowners Association, HOA, had made multiple attempts to draw Ben into their ranks. Each time, he refused politely but firmly. His property, after all, wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. He owned it outright, and there was no clause or covenant binding him to their community rules. Still, that hadn't stopped them from trying to exert their influence. Their self-proclaimed queen, Clarissa Wentworth, known behind her back as Queen Clarissa, or less kindly as Karen, was particularly relentless. Clarissa thrived on power. As president of the HOA, she wielded her authority like a medieval monarch enforcing her own code of law. She had made it her mission to bend Ben to her will, and when persuasion didn't work, she resorted to intimidation. One evening, as Ben sat on his wide front porch with a steaming cup of black coffee in hand, he noticed a man in a polo shirt and khaki stroll up to his front gate. The man taped a bright orange notice onto one of the wrought iron bars, then scurried back to his car without so much as a glance toward the house. Ben sighed, setting his mug down with an audible clink, and walked to the gate. Another violation notice. Unauthorized exterior modifications, it read in bold red letters. The supposed modification? A simple cedar bench he had added beneath one of his sycamore trees for quiet reading. Ben chuckled softly, shaking his head. They're getting desperate. He crumpled the paper in his fist and tossed it into the recycling bin as he made his way back toward the house. But just as he reached the top step, he noticed a black SUV idling down the street. Its tinted windows hid the driver's identity, but something about the way it slowed as it approached his driveway gave Ben a bad feeling. His gut told him this was no coincidence. He stood there, arms crossed, watching the vehicle until it finally crept away. The next morning, Ben was awakened by a thunderous knock at his front door. It was early, too early for visitors. Dressed in a gray t-shirt and jeans, he opened the door to find two uniformed men standing on his porch. Their mirrored sunglasses reflected his calm, unimpressed expression. Their posture was rigid, but something about them felt off. "Mr. Lawson?" the taller one asked. "That's me," Ben replied, taking a casual sip from the mug he held in his hand. "You're under arrest for multiple violations of the local housing code," the man declared, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Ben's brow arched ever so slightly. "Violating housing codes isn't exactly an arrestable offense," he replied calmly, his mind already working through the legal inconsistencies. "Since when does the police department enforce HOA regulations?" The second man shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, you're resisting arrest. We strongly advise you to comply." Ben took a deliberate step forward. "Which precinct are you from?" His gaze hardened as he studied them. The two men exchanged nervous glances. They didn't answer. Ben smirked. "You're not cops." Without missing a beat, he reached into his back pocket and flipped open his wallet. Inside gleamed the unmistakable badge and credentials of the state attorney general. The men blanched. The shorter one took an instinctive step backward. "I suggest you start talking," Ben said, his voice low and deliberate, "before I call the real police." The taller man swallowed hard. "The HOA," he admitted after a long, tense pause. "Clarissa Wentworth sent us." Ben sighed and crossed his arms. "Clarissa," he murmured. You've really outdone yourself. The shorter one stammered. Look, sir, this wasn't our idea. We were just hired by the HOA. They said you were violating community laws and needed encouragement. Encouragement, Ben repeated dryly. Your private security? The man nodded quickly. We work for Silverback Protective Services. They told us this was a legal enforcement job. We didn't know. His eyes darted to Ben's badge again. We didn't know you were you. That's your problem, Ben replied coolly. He snapped a quick photo of the two men, their faces pale with fear. Now, you're going to tell me exactly who gave you your orders. They crumbled immediately. Clarissa Wentworth, the taller one, admitted. She contacted us directly. Ben pocketed his phone and took a slow, deliberate step toward them. You're going to leave now, he said, his voice ice cold. If I ever see you impersonating law enforcement again, you'll be explaining yourselves to a judge. The two men practically tripped over themselves as they scrambled back to their SUV. Tires squealed as they sped away. Ben stood silently for a moment, watching them disappear before turning his gaze toward the HOA offices down the street. It was time to deal with Clarissa. The setup. Ben wasted no time. He drove straight to City Hall and pulled up every document he could find on the Maplewood HOA's finances. It didn't take long to uncover irregularities. A few phone calls later, he had confirmation that Clarissa Wentworth had personally authorized the use of the private security firm to harass him. She'd even falsified paperwork to make it appear legitimate. But Ben wasn't satisfied with legal proof alone. He wanted poetic justice. That afternoon, he walked into the HOA's monthly board meeting, held in a lavish clubhouse that Clarissa treated like her royal court. As Ben entered unannounced, the room grew still. Clarissa sat at the head of the table, her posture stiffening when she saw him. You're not supposed to be here, she said sharply. Ben gave a slow, easy smile. Neither were the cops you sent to my house this morning. And yet, here we are. Murmurs rippled through the room. Clarissa's mask faltered for a moment before she regained composure. I have no idea what you're talking about. Ben held up his phone and tapped the screen. The recording of the two fake officers confessing played loud and clear. Gasps echoed around the table. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at Clarissa in shock. This is outrageous. Clarissa snapped. He's twisting everything. Oh, Clarissa, Ben interrupted softly. You didn't just bend the rules. You broke the law. He listed her offenses with clinical precision. Impersonating law enforcement, hiring unlicensed security, conspiracy to intimidate homeowners, and abuse of authority as HOA president. Clarissa paled, but Ben wasn't finished. You're going to resign? Effective immediately. And if I don't, she sneered. Ben's smile widened. Then I send everything I've gathered to the district attorney, and you can explain it to a judge. Clarissa's facade crumbled. After a long, painful silence, she stood. Fine, she hissed. I resign. But Ben knew she wasn't done. People like Clarissa never went down quietly. The fall. Over the next few days, Ben dug deeper. He found evidence of embezzlement, fraudulent fines issued to homeowners, and contracts awarded to companies owned by Clarissa's relatives. It was an empire of corruption, and Ben was determined to dismantle it brick by brick. He contacted local news outlets, tipped off state regulators, and gathered homeowners for a special meeting. Word spread quickly. When the next HOA meeting rolled around, the clubhouse was standing room only. Reporters lined the back walls with cameras rolling. Clarissa tried to maintain her composure, but her hands trembled as Ben took center stage. Let's talk about real violations, he said, holding up a thick folder of evidence. He exposed everything. Fraudulent fees, embezzled funds, illegal contracts. The room erupted in outrage. Homeowners who had suffered in silence for years now demanded answers and refunds. Then, as if on cue, two uniformed police officers entered the room. Clarissa Wentworth, one said, "You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and misuse of funds." Clarissa's face twisted in shock. "I'm the HOA," she shrieked as they handcuffed her. "Not anymore," the officer replied. Aftermath. The HOA collapsed within days. Homeowners voted overwhelmingly to dissolve it completely. The neighborhood celebrated its newfound freedom. Ben, ever the quiet observer, sipped his coffee on his porch as moving trucks hauled Clarissa's belongings away. Word was, she had to sell the house to cover her legal fees. "This isn't over," she screeched from inside the truck. Ben smiled faintly. "Sure it is." And for the first time in years, Maplewood was at peace.